Well, I am delighted to say good morning to you, Kim. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you, Mark.
No, thank you for participating in our leadership series. We appreciate it. And not to put too much pressure on you, but I'm sure our business audience is going to get a ton of value from your experience and insights and perspectives on human resources and business in general. So let's start. Can you just tell everybody who you are and a tiny bit of your background?
Well, my name is Kim Koser, and I've been in human resources since 1989. I worked for the William Morris Agency, a 111-year-old legacy company for many, many years. And when they sold the company in a merger in the middle of the recession, I changed industries and went into banking and worked for a startup called Bank of Manhattan. And they also entered into a merger, which gave me another opportunity to change industries. And I went into the hospitality industry to another legacy company called Hillcrest Country Club, founded in 1920 in West LA. And that's where I work now.
Well, good diversity, which should come through in some of the things we're going to talk about. This is the leadership series, so we ask everybody, what's your definition or perspective of leadership?
To me, a leader is someone who creates a vision, but then empowers the people who work for them to achieve that vision, and then supports them in doing that. And I honestly think it's as simple as that. I think those are the three fundamental aspects of leadership.
It's as simple as that, and yet not everybody can do it, right?
Oh yeah, that's for sure. Because you have to have
know,
all three. It's the three-legged stool.
you got that. I've always really appreciated the two words, human resources, and I think it's gotten convoluted a little bit over the years. But especially in my industry, executive search, the human resources is the number one asset of every organization. It's not always understood, it's not always appreciated, and strategically not always played well. What's your thoughts about what human resources is as a leader in an organization?
If culture drives success, which I really think it does, and I think that's pretty well accepted now, that all things being equal among competing companies, the thing that's really going to make a difference is the people, and the people are a reflection of the culture. HR, strategic HR leadership, is really in a position to drive that culture and help the CEO create the culture that he envisions as creating the results, but they have to do it together. This is my strong opinion. The CEO can't do it without HR because HR controls so many of the programs and policies that are the engagement points between the employees and the company. And HR has a very hard time doing it alone without the CEO. What I've found, so those people have to be matched. They have to be well matched. And unfortunately, I think not all executives are great recruiters. They don't always know what they're looking for. So they don't know how to choose an HR person who's going to work well with them. I have followed in every position I've ever taken an HR person who wasn't succeeding. So for me, that worked out kind of well because they knew, because it wasn't working, they began to become aware of how critical it was. And when I was chosen for the position, I was given a lot of support and resources. And this was true in each position that I've had. And as a result of that support, I was able to achieve quite a bit. But the other part of that, when it doesn't play well, is, HR people are just people, just like CEOs are just people.
Right.
They are not all suited to a position that requires that you really be a role model. You can't say one thing and do another if you're going to really make an impact in HR, and the same is true for the CEO. So if a CEO chooses an HR person who is really going to work well with them, and they're both capable of modeling that vision for employees in every interaction, every day, and really working together, then it will work out. You
No,
know?
I think that's brilliant. I think it's right on. You know what? Peter Drucker had a very famous quote that I love. He said, "Culture will eat strategy for breakfast."
I love that. I
So
love
when you mentioned culture being the most important, and it goes into my next point. You know, I truly believe human resources talent is still the number one asset of any company, bar none. You know, people hire people. A company doesn't hire people, and people join people. You don't join a company per se. Um, can you share how you see how to effectively work with management to show how development results in performance, obviously, but also that there's a return on investment when you do invest in the development of your people. There's a return also in how you acquire talent and retain talent subsequently.
That is a great question. You definitely cannot develop the person who's in the wrong job. So I really think it does start with hiring. So that's where HR can make a difference in really ensuring that the hiring that's going on is a cultural fit, the right person for the right job, and also at the same time identifying those people who are not succeeding and addressing that proactively, either helping them get on board, which is, I'd say it's 50-50. 50% of the time you can help people reconnect and get with the program, but 50% of the time you can't, and you have to be brave enough to move those people along. Because unless you've got all the right people in the right position, your development efforts are not going to be 100% effective. Then, though, you have to choose, in terms of ROI, when you're setting the goals for the development program, that's where the goals have to be carefully chosen to align with the strategic vision, the business plan of the company. And if you do that correctly, then the results that the development program produces, you're going to be able to frame them to the business leaders in a way that makes sense to them and is speaking to the things that are of interest to them. But perhaps the biggest return on investment for HR is, when HR isn't working and when people are not happy, the CEO hears about it. The senior leadership hears about it.
Right.
And if they start to hear positive things after bringing in a new HR leader, and that person really hitting the ground, being the role model, aligning what they're doing with the strategic plan and the business plan, then they're going to start to hear good things. And that is the biggest return on investment. There's no question that your culture has to support development as well. So if you've chosen the right people, gotten rid of the wrong people, you've got a culture that really supports development, and you're framing the outcomes in terms that people can understand, then the people who work there are happy to be there. They want to share that with other people. They want to stay. And that's your talent acquisition and your retention.
No, I think that's right on and well said. I've even noticed with cities, especially with social media these days, as you know, people not only tell people, they tell the world about whether they love where they're working or not. And I've actually seen it as a good strategy of certain cities I've lived in, where they promote people talking about how good it is where they work, because then people from other cities say, wow, it looks like they're really enjoying, LA, Miami, Chicago, and it amazingly how that even helps the city attract good talent. Not only the company, but the city.
That's a really, really good point. You're right.
And the more talent there is, the better it is for your organization and the others around. So, that kind of relates then to setting up a winning culture. What's that, as they used to say on American Idol or The Voice or all these shows, what's that it factor to have, like, I compare a lot of things to sports, have consistent winning seasons in an organization?
I just have to quote Bernie Banks, because so recently I heard this quote and I loved it so much. They asked, a radio interviewer asked him, this was a long time ago, how did you learn to deal with the disappointment? And he said, well, I care. I care if we lose the game, but I don't care too much. So, it's called it factor for a reason, because it's really very difficult to define. But I think that it has to do with a leader being able to communicate the message. Now, all leaders are different. Some people have a really big personalities, right? And they get, somehow it seems they know everyone in the company. And their enthusiasm is infectious and contagious. And they're smart and they're inspiring. That's the guy I work for now, is like that. But not everyone, you don't have to have that big personality.
Agreed.
You just have to have a message, and you just have to be consistent. And people have to believe that it's authentic. And then being consistent is being consistent through the good times and the bad times, through business challenges and personal challenges that face employees, and making people believe that you actually really buy this yourself and that it's consistent and it's fair. And it's not easy to do, but it has an awful lot to do with being accountable yourself. So if the CEO is accountable, has a great vision, and can get the message out in all the many different ways that they have, from one-on-one, walking around the floor, talking to people, to what they put in writing, to the programs, that they promote, and then that's the it factor, if you ask me.
No, I think that's so true, especially when you say there's no one personality that fits. There's been coaches that also, like you said, that are yelling and loud and this and that and emotional, and then there's others that are so quiet, but when they say something, people listen. So that probably is the it factor of the leader. It's not necessarily the personality, but how they do it.
And it's also letting people know, of course, that it's okay to fail because you want to learn and grow. So having a learning culture where people are encouraged to talk about what they learn every single time, even for success.
What I heard a few statements a bunch of times that I would repeat is, from breakdown comes opportunity, number one.
Yeah.
And the best return on investment if somebody makes a mistake is to absolutely keep them. The worst return on investment is not to fire them, but to keep them, because they're going to want to make up for what that mistake was and learn from it and then do great things afterwards. So that is a great return on investment right there. So no, it's amazing stuff. If you relate that to board members, in your experience, working with or engaging in different ways with board members, how do you see their impact as leaders on an organization?
I think that board members can make a great difference, but they really have to understand the boundaries of their role. And they make that difference as long as they can work within those boundaries. Their job is to support the executives who are reporting to them, right?
Right.
I think the worst kind of board member would be a micromanaging board member who tried to step out of the boardroom, go down to the CEO or the GM's level and do their job for them, so or interfere in doing their job, even under the guise of being supportive. You've got to let people do their jobs, and I think great leaders allow people to do their jobs, and so that's what makes the difference. They've obviously got to be strong, and they've got to be able to state their opinion, listen to other opinions, and be consensus builders.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. It's a long topic, but we do board searches too, and we definitely make it clear, especially with former CEOs, that they've got to be very smart and not even let it be perceived that they think they could be a better CEO than the current one. And one of the main roles, aside from the different duties they may have, is to provide some vision for the CEO and support as to what's going to be happening in the future, because the CEO doesn't always have the time to do all that.
The CEO doesn't have the same type of support as everyone below him.
Right.
So you're absolutely right. It's someone for the CEO to bounce their ideas and their visions off of, so.
Let's talk about young people. I almost hate to say that these days. I'm saying it too often. Let's talk about young people. What kind of advice? I mean, you've developed relationships over the years. You understand how valuable relationships are. What kind of advice would you give for up-and-coming leaders about, you know, how developing relationships impacts their own personal growth, their career growth, as well as the opportunity in human resources in that respect?
You know, working at the William Morris Agency was the ultimate place to observe the power of relationships that people build at the entry level, that they keep with them throughout their entire careers, and that pay off literally for decades. People start in the mailroom at William Morris. It's very, very famous. There are all sorts of very successful people who started in the William Morris mailroom.
Mm-hmm.
And when I ran the agent training program, one of the features of that program was bringing in successful industry leaders to talk to the trainees on a regular basis about how they became who they became, how they got where they got. And those stories were always filled with references to the people that they met in the very beginning and how they came up together, and they frequently ended up working together. At William Morris, as young people we were considered the graduate school of entertainment, and people would be chosen, very competitive process, come up through the ranks, and it was very difficult to become an agent, but many of them really just came there for that education that they would take elsewhere in the industry. And the agents and executives at William Morris really found that valuable. When these people would leave William Morris, they would go into all of the buyer organizations in the industry, and they knew these are our people, these are our contacts, this is our go-to person, that we started them here and we helped them develop. But then when I went to banking, I saw that it was also, like entertainment, a very kind of closed circle. People really went from one bank to another. They met people. They stayed in touch with them. This is all predicated on if you love the industry, right? You can't do this if you don't love the industry.
Right, right.
If you do love it, then you will move from your very first job in banking or whatever the industry is. You will meet people as you go from company to company. You'll retain those relationships, and you'll build a reputation. And if you succeed and you make it into the senior leadership level, you've got people throughout the region, or however large your circle is, who know you, who respect you, who care about your opinion, who will always want to work with you, who will take your call. And it's just obviously completely invaluable. You know,
I agree.
A career is never going to be the same without that network of relationships. But you can't have that without a true love for what you're doing.
I think that's it. And love for people. Even though every once in a while I tell myself I should have been a veterinarian, I still like people. Now here's a couple of quick personal questions, almost one or two word answers. Do you have a pet?
I do. I have a three-legged cat.
A three-legged cat?
Yes. My mother stole this cat from the neighbors by feeding it when they were neglecting it. We took it to the vet, we got it fixed, we brought it inside, but we felt so guilty. It was really an outdoor cat, so we gave it a kitty door. It ran out into the street, got hit by a car, and the only way to save it was to take this leg off, and you've never seen a cat move so fast or act so happy as this three-legged cat who gets along fine without that fourth leg.
And what's his name?
His name is Little Kitty. Because
Little?
he was just a stray. I mean, he was a stray from next door. And there was a
Very cool.
cat and a little cat. So he was Little Kitty, and now, of course, he's gigantic.
Do you have a favorite activity or sport?
Well, I love to go to the movies, but in terms of physical stuff, I love to ride my bike, and I love to hike.
Well, wonderful place to be in California for that. Well, speaking of movies, what's your favorite movie then?
Well, favorite movie is very, very... I don't think I could ever say what my favorite movie is, but I will put in a little plug for one of the... well, I'll tell you what my favorite movie of this Academy Awards season is. I love The Imitation Game.
Great movie.
Great movie. And a really...
Eye-opening, too, as to what happened.
It's a tragedy, you know, and it does, at least it's not that same world in the Western world, as destroyed that poor man. But that's a really interesting HR story because it was an oddball genius.
Right.
He really didn't fit in. And if they hadn't been able to see his value, and if he hadn't fought and gotten what he needed, and won over that team of people who really disliked him at first, then who knows what the world would be like.
You're right. Another prodigy who happens to be a friend of mine is Walter O'Brien on, I don't know if you ever saw the show Scorpion.
No,
but
I haven't seen it.
It's amazing, and prodigies and the same type of scenario. So real quick, do you have a favorite type of music?
I always grew up as a total rock and roll kid. I mean, when I was a grade schooler, I loved the Beatles, and I graduated to the Stones and all the great music throughout the 70s and then the 80s. But lately, I have really had the opportunity to be exposed to the classical music world, and particularly contemporary classical music, which is kind of a revelation to me. And I've found that LA is such a great classical music town. We have a wonderful classical music station, KUSC. I just love that radio station. I also have jazz. We have K-Jazz. And we have Disney Hall and the Koser School, and so it's a great cultural city, and I've expanded my music horizons here.
Well, I'm sure the Chamber of Commerce thanks you. And how about favorite food?
I'll tell you something. I can't possibly have a favorite food because I love to eat so much. And I'm very fortunate. Somehow my mother was reading Dr. Spock, and she let me sit in my high chair and play with my food, and there's almost nothing that I don't like to eat. My mother loves to cook. I work at Hillcrest Country Club, where they have a fantastic executive chef, and the food is always fantastic. And LA is a great restaurant town. It's also a great grocery shopping town.
It is too.
Where I live, we have every ethnic grocery store that you could possibly want. So there's no recipe that you could come up with that you couldn't find that ingredient here in Van Nuys, California.
Well, I think you've got the recipe for leadership down pat. So congratulations. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you soon.
Thank you so much, Mark. This was really fun.